Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Jerry Turnquist, and I'd like to take you on a little tour this morning of Elgin's Holy Hill area, the part of the Near East side of Elgin. It's part of our oldest area of Elgin, and not necessarily all the most interesting things. There's a lot of other things around town, but this gives you a little glimpse of something and lets you maybe see and redefine the neighborhood that we're in maybe differently than you have. What I'm doing today is part of the Bike and Pedestrian Committee's events for Elgin Bike Walk and Move Elgin Week, and there's various other events going on that I can tell you about at the end. And Tom Armstrong's in our group this morning, who was part of that committee. So there's biking and walking tours that we're doing. And guess what? I'm doing a walking tour today, not a bike one, although I did one a few years ago. But Jerry Turnquist is getting a little bit older to do some of those things here, but we'll see how it goes. We're starting our tour in front of First Congregational Church. And it's really kind of one of the more historic buildings in Elgin. It's one of the significant structures in the Elgin Historic District, and actually all of our tour today is a walk within the Elgin Historic District, a little corner of it. It's over 600 structures that are part of a National Register district and protected by a local ordinance. First Congregational Church is actually a church that evolved out of James T. Gifford's cabin, and he was the founder of Elgin, and we'll be at that cabin site in just a little bit. This is actually the third building for First Congregational Church, and built in 1889 and for $35,000 by an architect named Clarence Stiles. And it's really quite a notable structure. It's in the Richardson Romanesque style, and the church is actually what's called sort of the Akron style that evolved in Akron, Ohio in the late 1800s, and a sort of church in the round type structure. Unlike some of the rectangular churches that have the big processional and the aisle down the middle, this church doesn't have that. So that's their statement of how they were feeling at the time. I belong to this church, and actually I did a renewal of vows here just a few months ago, and my wife and I had to choose which of the smaller aisles we were going to go down because we didn't have that particular ability to go down that main aisle. A lot of movers and shakers of Elgin have been part of this church, and not the least of which is George Lord, who gave a park to the city, and his name is woven all through Elgin history. Actually lived in the house right across the street where the telephone company is today. And many other people were part of this church as well. And it actually served as sort of a community auditorium before we had the Hemmons Cultural Center, and later on the Masonic Temple, which is a block away, that sort of served that same thing. Graduations, community meetings, Booker T. Washington, Jane Addams, other people like that would speak here, and it has a large seating capacity. So, and actually one of the largest pipe organs in the Fox Valley as well. So, like a lot of downtown churches, First Congregational has officially reaffirmed their stance on staying in the downtown. Some have left over the years for sites further out west. First Congregational has chosen to remain here. In fact, as we were coming and going today, people taking part of the food pantry that is located go on here. In fact, you can see two cornerstones over there. One, 2009. The church raised some money a few years ago and refaced this part of the building, and actually did some interior modeling as well. They feel that their mission is best served by remaining in the downtown where people need their services. And it's, of course, pretty nice to go into a building that has a historic character of one like this as well. So actually in this, talking about the Akron style and church, many of them have this Sunday school wing right to the left of it. And this was built to look like this in the 1960s again. And this is a little bit of a reconstruction of what was originally here. One of the other things to note about First Congregational, and this is probably one of the longer places we'll stop and talk today, out of Elgin's notable events in history, one of them was the Palm Sunday tornado in 1920, and it hit various places in Elgin. A lot of the survivors are pretty much passed on, but talked to different ones and read a lot about it, but this church was hit that Sunday morning just after church got out, and it hit the steeple, which fell into the church, and there were 3 people killed during that experience. Fortunately, church had just gotten out. The whole experience would have been a whole lot different, but the Palm Sunday tornado, which was part of various tornadoes that were going on in the area, really did a lot of damage in Elgin. It came across from the west side and moved up Dundee Avenue, and one of the real notable events of Elgin's history. So I'm going to lead you over in just a minute and show you Elgin's originally planned Main Street. So we'll stop here and head over to that spot for a minute. So we're on a one-block stretch of what's called Villa Court, which kind of connects to Center Street and Dundee Avenue and Villa Street that way. And people drive along here, walk along here, and wonder, gee, why is this so wide here? How did this happen to be? Well, I guess it just happened that way. Not really. When Gifford laid out Elgin's community and platted the original plat of Elgin, this was conceived as his Main Street. This is where the town was going to develop around, according to Gifford's plan. But early on in Elgin's history, the Kimball family, which settled the west side of town, downtown moved towards the river, and things would work out differently. Gifford was a very good town planner. He had us up above the seasonal floods, and there's all kinds of pictures you can find of outhouses and other things washing along some of the downtown streets over the years when flooding would occur. But the downtown would move in its very early years towards to join the Giffords and Kimballs on the different sides of the river, and this would never quite evolve into the downtown. Where First Congregational Church was originally a seminary. There was an inn planned on another corner here and a couple other stores, but they would never really evolve into anything. As we look at this area too, one of the things I always like pointing out as I take people on tours of Elgin, well, gee, we're looking right back to the beginning of the town, right back to, no, we're not. Sometimes, in some cases, we are, and we'll show you one of the Elgin's oldest, probably Elgin's oldest structure and Elgin's oldest downtown structure, which are different things in a little bit. But we're looking at the city's past, but not necessarily back to the beginning, because many of these cases, it's the first, second, and third, and sometimes fourth buildings that have sat on this site. First Congregational Church, again, was preceded by a seminary. As we look across the street over here, the little church over there that's now the KFC Hall, the Knights of Columbus Hall, was actually built by the Presbyterians. They had a bigger church sitting right on this corner that burnt down in the 1870s, just shortly after it was built. It faced Chicago Street, and they built that structure that would take its place as sort of a temporary thing, but they never did rebuild on this location. They would relocate to the west side. As we walk along here too, I probably want to mention a couple different times. You know, I originally started talking about this being the Holy Hill area. You will see as we go to different places quite a number of churches in the area, and that also goes back to James T. Gifford, who was a Congregationalist actually, and as I said, he had the First Congregational Church that we were looking at before evolved out of his log cabin, but he gave free lots to churches that want to locate in this community, and that led to all this assemblage of churches in this center city, this Holy Hill area. So you can go into old county directories and places like that and find one story, even a wayward traveler in the southern part of the Fox Valley asking for that city of churches, and the person would direct them to Elgin. So what's Elgin famous for? Well, as we'll make our tour along here, watches, the dairy industry, which we'll know something about. We have a Grand Victoria Casino today, but certainly its heritage of churches is constant, the theme of what we're doing, and we're in the oldest area that's got the greatest concentration of that. In fact, the last time I Googled churches in Elgin, I think I got over 100 hits. We got everything from a Buddhist temple to the Islamic center, you name it, and Elgin's got the churches. If you don't find what you like here, you're welcome to start your own, as many people did. So it's I guess a nice, very nice heritage to have and still be part of. So behind me is the First Universalist Church, and we're looking back to late 1880s, 1890s, and that must be been the original building there too, right, Jerry? No, not really. Actually, the red brick building that sits behind it, that would later be known as Unity Hall, was the First Universalist Church, and it sat on this corner, and they thought the corner was pretty prominent when they rebuilt their church, so they moved that whole structure a little further away. That red brick building looks like could be that old, but Mike Elft and I, Mike Elft, who is our real true city historian, and the rest of us are just interested students compared to him. We talk about the oldest buildings in downtown Elgin. That building dates from 1866 and originally was wood and had tall spires on it and looked very different than we remember it today, and would serve as the incubators for some other churches that would meet in the area, and people could meet there. and use that building. But what's going back to the First Universalist Church, which is now another congregation is located in there. It's unique. If you one of the people who was involved in this was George Hunter, who was the superintendent of the Elgin National Watch Company. This church is designed in the shape of a pocket watch. If you could see this from the sky, you would see it. We're looking at the fob in this corner and the main part of the watch from the air there. Anybody that would Google it and view it from above could see the shape of it in the church of a shape of a pocket watch. And of course, Elgin's heritage of the watch company goes way back to the very, very beginning, and many of the people that came from this particular congregation, or were part of this congregation in the East, came here to work in the watch factory and would found this church. And of course, the story of Elgin's watch factory is another whole story that is for another tour or something sometime, where our watch industry began during the Civil War, and the first watch rolled off the assembly line in 1867 at the Hemmons Auditorium, and that would be part of Elgin's history for over 100 years, and over 60 million Elgin watches were manufactured in Elgin. But that's a story for another time. So we're going to walk along Villa Street and go about a block down here. We'll pass a couple other smaller churches that are located in this area and take a look at a couple other buildings and head towards James T. Gifford's log cabin, which was the first of several things in Elgin's history. We walked along Villa Street. You saw a couple other different churches, one the Free Methodist, another building here, 77 Villa Street, was originally an Adventist church, would serve as the incubator for the Jewish synagogue in Elgin before they would move over on Division Street. And one of the longtime occupants here was a ballet studio named what? Anybody in the audience here remember? Lisa Bohm. So she was well known in Elgin, and this is where she got her start and was here for years. Also, right behind me is the Prince Castle, and I went to Elgin High School a block away, and we came over here all kinds of times. Prince Castle would later evolve or become part of the Cock Robin restaurants, but it started in DeKalb, and there were various ones around northern Illinois, and the last guy, name of the founder, was named Prince. And it was always kind of different than some other places. You'd come in and grab your hamburger. They were already made up, or cheeseburgers, 25 cents and 29 cents for those hamburger and cheeseburger. I remember in 1967 when I was a student here, and of course they had malts or shakes here. Anybody in the audience remember their trademark shake here? They were known as 1 in a million, and pretty made. But if you wanted ice cream, they scooped that out for you too. So it would later close, and some of the other ones would change and evolve into some of the Cock Robin restaurants that we have today. But I never knew, even when I was a high school student, this building actually dated from 1930s. So, really a long part of Elgin's history. Now I'm going to turn you around and show you the other side of the street for a minute. The area, the other corner here, and we're at the corner of Villa and Fulton. This is a picture of the second building for First Congregational Church. We were looking at it as we began this tour, but this building would later become what was originally known as the New Brick Church, would later be sold to the Swedish Lutheran congregation and be one of the buildings. It was one of the first buildings torn down as part of the Civic Center, or the parking lots that were here, as Elgin in the 1950s and 60s needed a lot of parking, surface parking in city lots. This is one of the first buildings that would come down for that. This building is actually the site where Elgin was first incorporated. We have a city that its founding is February 29th, 1854, but before it was the city of Elgin, was also the village of Elgin, which was an entity that was 1 square mile in size. And the vote to incorporate it into the city of Elgin took place at this congregation building in 1846. I think the vote was 13-0. All men voting, of course. Women couldn't vote at that time. So it's kind of nice to look at that. And, of course, Bethlehem Lutheran, that would later become part of this congregation and move out towards the Lord's Park area near the east side of Elgin. So behind me is a church built in 1896, and it wouldn't stay as a church very long. By 1917, it would be bought by and operated as the Grand Army of the Republic building, that it would remain for a long time. So it would serve as a place for some Masonic temple groups or Masonic groups to meet in places like that. But the GAR, the Grand Army of the Republic, was a very, very large veterans group in Elgin that allowed blacks in it, one of the few organizations that would, and that was their meeting place. As they would later close up, some of the artifacts from there would later become part of the Elgin Area Historical Society collection. And we're actually standing in an area known as the GAR Park, a little triangular park, and there's a memorial here in honor of those men who had served in the Grand Army of the Republic. The very, very influential veterans group, just about impossible, I think, to get elected president at the time without their support. Behind me is the Elgin Turners. Actually opened as St. Mary's Academy in 1880, and it was a Catholic school for girls. Didn't stay that very long and became co-ed after a while. In the 1920s, they would move over to their location over on Gifford Street, but the later the occupant would be the Elgin Turners, that I think dates from the mid-1880s, that was down on East Chicago Street at the time, would take up a residence here. So here we have one of Elgin's oldest buildings that really, since 1880, has really only had 2 occupants. That's kind of an amazing thing. Now, we're not looking back at the building the way it existed as well. It was a school and had a pitched roof and some other embellishments, but when the Turners over the years have remodeled it and changed it and built out and expanded it inside to accommodate the meeting rooms for their organization, which is a German-American athletic club, and with a focus on gymnastics, which they did in the top floor, which was a gym for years. So we're in Davidson Park, and one of the things that I wanted to point out to you is the plaque that notes that 12 paces north of here was James T. Gifford's cabin, the founder of Elgin, and we'll take you over a little bit and show you one other couple things related to that. So why would he put a cabin here in the middle of a street? Well, obviously this street wasn't here at the time, and this is where he located his structure. Actually, during Elgin's centennial, and for a while later, there was actually a little plaque, bronze plaque similar to that actually sat out in the street out there commemorating Gifford's cabin. So we'll walk a little bit away from the noise and note a couple other things to you about Mr. Gifford and this little area right here. So behind me is a missing sign that we know where it is, that incidentally would point also to Gifford's cabin that we were just looking at, indicating that it was the first church, it was the first post office. Harriet Gifford, part of the family, was the first teacher in Elgin. We have a school named in her honor, Harriet Gifford School. Some people just call it Gifford Elementary School, but its real name is Harriet Gifford Elementary, and that pointed over to that area as well. We have a rough idea what that cabin looked like that they had. This is some information that First Congregational Church has. We don't actually have a picture of that cabin that existed in the 1830s, but based on descriptions given by the Gifford family, this was a drawing or rendering done as to what that cabin looked like. So again, it's served as the incubator for a lot of Elgin's early meetings and times, and was the first home in Elgin. Some people also note that his brother Hezekiah had a cabin about the same time at St. Charles in Yarwood, but this is the area that we're in that would evolve and officially become part of the original plat of Elgin. So what was the first log cabin in Elgin? I think you have to give the distinction to this one. Before we leave this area, one of the things, and actually there was a recreation of this built here in Elgin Centennial in 1935 that sat here and would later be moved to the Girl Scout camp on the west side of Elgin. One of the other things of note here before we leave this area is the Doughboy statue that's down toward the corner, put up in 1922 in honor of the 50 or so people from the Elgin area that died during World War I. It originally had a bayonet on it, and not too long after it went up, that bayonet was broken off. Using some money a few years ago, the structure was refinished and a bayonet put back on there, and I guess some young people or whoever decided it still wasn't to true historic form, so they broke the bayonet back off again. So most people that ever go by there will never remember a bayonet on it. We have pictures at the Elgin History Museum that indicate that there was a bayonet on there. And one other thing about that, sometimes I've talked to at least one or two policemen, and maybe more, can tell the story regarding their sense of humor. Sometimes they'll occasionally tell someone else that they have a call of a man with a gun over here at Prairie and Villa, and they get over here and look around, and hopefully they're not wasting anybody's time, because they find out that all it is that World War I statue too. So, and I think there's some other things as we come to the 100th anniversary of America's involvement in World War I, that during 1917 that some other things will take place with regard to the Doughboy statue and given a little more prominence during that time. So there's actually donations from the watch company. A lot of kids chipped in 5 cents, 10 cents, and 25 cents to help raise the funds for that. So it's a real community effort how it came to be. Actually, this grassy area behind me used to have a base and was originally going to be the base for the Trygve Rolstad pioneer statue that would later be located by the Fox River on Kimball Street in Elgin. But this is originally where that was going to be located. How are they going to pay for something like that? It was conceived during Elgin's centennial in the mid-1930s. Actually, Congress authorized a $50 that still is a collector's item for people today, for coin collectors, that has the statue on the back and was actually sold for $1.50, and the extra dollar was going to go towards raising the statue. But it was the Depression, and not enough money was raised for that, and the project never really happened the way they thought, and the base eventually corroded away and was taken out, but put in by the WPA, the Works Progress Administration. So this originally was where that location was going to come, but I think it's much more prominently placed with all the things that have happened along Elgin's riverfront to make that a centerpiece for Elgin. It sits not much more majestically by the Kimball Street Bridge today. And a lot of the donors for that project are on a plaque right beneath it. Behind me is the third home for James T. Gifford. We were looking at his cabin, and he had another little house across the street. But dating from the 1850s, this is a cobblestone-style home in Elgin. And people say, what's Elgin noted for? Well, we were talking watches, dairy industry, and things like that. But the cobblestone homes are one of the things that really are unique. There were probably 20 some at one time. There's not that many remaining. I haven't counted them lately, 7 or 8, and a couple homes that have cobblestone foundations. But this is a style that evolved out of upstate New York, and actually a lot of the people that were working on the Erie Canal project, some of the upstate New Yorkers, were the first one to come to Elgin, and they brought with them this style of building these cobblestone homes, making a product called limestone putty mortar, and building the walls right here, very, very thick walls, build it up a little bit at a time, and build these cobblestone type homes. Gifford would die shortly after this house was completed, and his son Orlando Davidson, we were in Davidson Park a little bit ago, would become the owner of it. And by early 1900s, it actually became rental property. So some people see different things around here and wonder over the years, how long some different things. Some places in our historic district have been rental property for a long time, and this is being one of them. That mansard roof, that curved roof style, Second Empire, was added in the 1870s. The other thing worth noting is we're actually looking at the back of this home. The front would face Villa Street, and this was part of Gifford's big estate here at the time. Villa Street was the state route that came to Elgin, and people that would build these cobblestone homes, especially in the east, again, most of them are within a 60-mile radius of Rochester, New York, would trade stones and get some of the prettier ones and the better shaped ones and use them on the front of their homes. So we're looking at actually the back, which has been the front for a long time, and if you could peek through from Villa Street, you'd see some of the other ones that are a little different nature. So it's also very interesting when you look closely at that home. The mortar in there, made locally, has been in there for years. It lives and breathes, and then we came up with a product called Portland cement that has all kinds of other different characteristics to it. But look at the craftsmanship on some of these early homes like this. And the Gifford Park Association, our very active neighborhood group, I know has paid and trained at least one artisan to learn how to work with these kinds of products so that people that own cobblestone homes can rebuild them and take care of them in the right way. We start putting the newer cement products in here, and they just aren't the right fit for these. And you'll see another cobblestone in a little bit in this tour that has had some more modern things done to it. And gee, I was telling you there's maybe 7 or 8 cobblestones around Elgin. Are there any more around? I don't know. We do know, and we'll see a house in a little bit, that we took some aluminum siding off and found a cobblestone underneath it. So maybe out there, someone hearing or listening to this tour might just want to look a little closer under their siding if they think they have an older home. Maybe, just maybe, you have a cobblestone hidden under there and we don't know about it. one other example, when we look at different houses in the area, there are houses that were predecessors to some of these, and actually there was a house built there in 1898 that had an octagon house. Now when I give tours to my students, I ask them how many sides there are, and I'll actually do that to this group. How many sides would an octagon house have?
8, sir.
They all say 8, so we have a very nice group with us today. But that would burn down, and octagon houses were popular in various areas at the time, but this house would be replaced. It was built by George Cook, and he was the son of David C. Cook. So David C. Cook, who had a large Sunday school publishing company business in Elgin, to become the world's largest publisher of Sunday school materials, which was brought here by our influence of churches, along with a brother and publishing company. His son lived here, and one of the other things that was unique about it is it had a turnaround garage in it. He was the son of a very, very wealthy person in Elgin, and turnaround garages, which I'm learning weren't all that uncommon, was one of the features that this house had that kind of made it kind of unique. Behind me is what many Elgin people would probably call High School Park, but the real name of this is the Gifford Park area, and it's right in a building across the other side that the Gifford Park Association would get their start in the 1970s. The area behind us is originally Elgin High School, but it's another example of actually, depending, if you look at the corner, there's actually 3 buildings that were predecessors to that. An old brick, a church or a high school built in 1883, and then this one was built out and completed just about 100 years ago. So there's 3 high schools that have sat here, and of course this building has grown and evolved. In the early 1970s, Elgin moved to their new site out near Maroon Field on the west side. And the gym and the northern portion were built in the 1930s. There's all kinds of stories about Elgin High, and we could stay here all day and talk about that. I was one of the last few classes to come through here, and all of us that had the opportunity to come to this old Elgin High School really appreciate the character, although there was no parking, no swimming pool, or all the other things that amenities that other schools had. One of the things that's interesting, I had someone on my tour a couple years ago when I did one. The north wing that was now part of the administration area, when it was built out in the 1930s and still not fully used, the Elgin High School had a rifle club that practiced down there. So the last thing I think you'd find is that people bringing any kinds of guns or anything that even looked like a gun into a school, but that's an example of how times have changed, I guess. We brought rifles right into that building and had a rifle club. What's Elgin's oldest home? This one probably is it. Probably dating from the early 1840s, and actually had an addition on the side that was removed. If you went down the side, you could see that to accommodate a very old structure next to it as well. And I believe one of the original pillars was replaced as well, but this one has had some work done to it, so it doesn't look the same as the Gifford cobblestone that we were looking at a little bit ago. One of the smaller homes in Elgin, but again, probably our oldest structure as far as we know. Its contemporaries were log cabins and things at the time that existed in Elgin. And one of the things that's very unique about it, it was actually a home that was at one time covered with aluminum siding. Now, why you'd put aluminum siding over cobblestone, I guess at a certain time we put aluminum siding on everything. So didn't move too fast, maybe we put aluminum siding on it. And the Gifford Park Association, borrowing an idea, I think, from Rock Island, Illinois, called the Great Unveiling, offered $1,000, I think it was, to neighbors that wanted to take aluminum siding off. And they would provide the labor, they'd give you the money as an encouragement to get some of the aluminum siding off. And I think people pretty much suspected there was there was cobblestone underneath, but it was quite an unveiling to see that and see it brought back. So it's a very nice restoration, in that we brought back the cobblestone to show that, again, there's very few of those around. South Elgin has a couple of them, and up through Wisconsin, but they're something pretty unique to Elgin. We're going to go off in that direction in a minute, but I just want to let you look this way. As you look down this area, this area that we're in is sometimes called the gully, and as you look at the multifamily buildings up ahead, you can see that they're down below street level, and you go, well, why would they build them down like that? And actually, when those structures were built, they were at street level, and this whole area was built up, and you can see the low areas on each side of the street. So what's under and what kind of fill is all under this street? That's a good question. I don't know. Maybe some interesting finds for an archaeologist sometime. But it's kind of interesting to note, and as people that walk along here see those ground floors that are actually below the sidewalk level, they were actually at street level one time. Behind me is another mansard-style roof house, a nice example of it. And one of the people that was part of this for a while was a man named Murphy, and he would actually design the prototype of the Elgin sweeper. That would still a business that's in the area today that makes their product and sends it around the world. So a place called the Elgin Tower and Tank Company that wasn't really producing towers and tanks at the time. He walked in and had some plans for what he thought was a prototype for a street sweeper, and eventually got going, and there's the guy's home that started all that. So what's the oldest building in Elgin? Gee, probably the one behind me right over here, which is part of the Roca grocery store. We think this building dates from about 1838 and was probably the first frame structure in Elgin, and looks like the picture I'm holding. Union meaning together, and it was a church built by the Baptists and the Congregationalists for their first church, and they would worship in there together. And it doesn't quite look like what we see today, but the outline of the roof and some of the other features is probably the same. Many people for years remember this is Parkview Drug that would be over here during the days that Elgin High School was over here as well, but this was probably Elgin's oldest structure. And this is another example of structures that were moved, because this was not originally built here. It was built on the other corner of Geneva and DuPage, and actually when the Baptists would build a large congregation stone church over there, records indicate that this building was moved over to this location. So I don't know if it's anything that we're going to tout as any great historic piece in Elgin because of the changes and modifications that have been made to it over the years, but it probably does carry the distinction of being Elgin's oldest structure as we know it. So we're on the corner of Division and Chapel. What would you put on the far north east corner of a community that you were laying out that you maybe wouldn't put right in the center of the city? And the answer is not a dump. So what would you put in an area like this? A graveyard, and actually known as a burying ground. This is where Gifford planned the first little cemetery of Elgin. We weren't in the high Victorian type of things yet with all the elaborate stones, so things were more modest here. But I think the first grave in here was 1838. Don't quote me, but it's right on that year, just shortly after Elgin was being founded. And this would exist as a cemetery for Elgin's first few years, and in 1845, Elgin Cemetery, a few blocks away, which many of us would know as Channing Cemetery, many of the people would be moved over to that location. And then that would actually close, and they'd start moving people by the late 1890s, early 1900s, when Bluff City Cemetery opened in 1889. So some of our very earliest residents have actually had two moves since their burial, and I hope they're all in this final place where they're going today. And of course, whether you'd move a cemetery or not, something we did at the time, but it's always an interesting discussion to have with people on whether that's a good idea or not. On that site today is a home, the Queen Anne style home, a brick one, built by John Newman, who was a big mover and shaker in the dairy business in Elgin, and it would later become part of the Ludwig family, which is a dairy family in Elgin, and later become a restaurant known as the Buttermans. So for a long time, two different dairy families had a presence in this particular house. Now, we're standing next to Holy Trinity Lutheran Church, and my grandmother was a founder of this church. She was born in 1880, and one of the reasons I kind of know some of the things I know about Elgin history, she would provide me some talk about some different things and kind of nurture me in my thinking of Elgin history. But one of the things I never forget, when she was referring to very, very wealthy people, she would always refer to them as big butter and egg men. And I never could quite get, what do you mean, big butter and egg men, big butter and egg men? I knew it had to be someone of some prominence, but later, as I would learn about Elgin's dairy industry and realize the people, even before we had a watch factory in Elgin, we were shipping milk to Chicago in the early 1850s when the railroad would reach Elgin, and people would invest and become part of these large dairy conglomerates that we had in the Elgin area would be some of our wealthiest people in the area. So that dairy heritage, the Elgin Board of Trade that would set dairy prices through part of the nation, was very, very prominent in Elgin. By 1914 on up through World War I, the federal government was dealing with some of the price fixing that went on with that, and eventually that would be dissolved, and the dairy industry would take up greater prominence in the Wisconsin area, of course. And again, we're right next to Holy Trinity Church. It's kind of one of many Elgin's churches, that actually began in Unity Hall that we were talking about over there, the Elgin's oldest downtown. And my grandparents founded some of the charter members of this church, and I have pictures of them digging the foundation by hand after the church was built. Not uncommon that church foundations would be dug by hand. This church is just one of another one that met a niche for people at the time. From one of Elgin's oldest churches was St. John's, formed in 1839, and we had other Lutheran churches. But by the late 1890s, early 1900s, if you wanted to go to a Lutheran church in Elgin, you had to have the service primarily in Swedish, Norwegian, or German. And there were other people of Lutheran denomination that wanted to form their own church, an English-speaking Lutheran church. So this church was formed to meet that need, Holy Trinity Lutheran Church. And actually it is another one of the various churches that exist in the downtown area that has reaffirmed their mission to stay here, and they feel they have a church worth staying in, and their needs are best met by maintaining a presence in this area as well. Before we start our trip back to the beginning of our tour, I did want to note a couple other homes that are in this area. That farthest home, second from the corner, was actually an Italianate style house, and it was remarkably changed over the years. It would become a church in the 1920s, the Christian Zionist Church. But probably the more historic notable distinction of that home is it was bought by Gil Borden Jr., and he eventually intended to move to Elgin. Gil Borden, as in the Gil Borden is in the Borden dairy industry. His third wife, Emmeline Church, was from Elgin, and she convinced Gil Borden to move to Elgin. Borden had invented the process for condensed milk, and had factories in the east, and she convinced him that this would be a good location to put another one of his factories where the center is today. The rec center would become the largest milk producing company of its kind, producing the Eagle brand condensed milk, and it would become the real cog in the wheel to Elgin, already thriving as a dairy industry. And this that would be built there out during the Civil War would just add to Elgin's prominence as a dairy industry. He also had strict standards for milk products, and that gave Elgin a good name as well in terms of the type of stuff that we were producing here. Now, Gil Borden never lived in Elgin. He died shortly before the time that he was to move here, but his wife, and he was buried in the east, his wife is buried at Bluff City Cemetery in Elgin. But yet we remember Gil Borden all the time because we have a library called the Gil Borden Public Library in Elgin. And actually the reason we have that is because his stepson, Alfred Church, who lived in the other corner, that's been a funeral home since the late 1930s rather, his brother and him, Alfred and Samuel Church, who were stepsons of Gil Borden, decided that they wanted to honor their stepfather, and they bought a house, Schofield home, that still stands at Spring and Highland today, and gave it to Elgin Township that operated the library at the time, that was then down on Chicago Street, with the stipulation that it be known as the Gil Borden Public Library. So from the early 1890s, Elgin's library, originally operating as a township library, has carried the name the Gil Borden Public Library. It's moved to two separate locations since then, and it still carries that name. So sometimes people that are new to the community get a little confused when they hear or wonder or look up, let's find the Elgin Library. You're not going to find anything by that location, but you will find the Gil Borden Public Library. By the way, Mr. Church, who lived in that corner, made his money in real estate, and that's why he had a very nice home. He wasn't in the dairy industry, and he left Elgin in the early 1900s. He said the property taxes here are too high. I don't know if I've ever heard that before, but I guess maybe it goes back a little further than we think. I think he moved to New Jersey is where he relocated. So two notable homes in Elgin and part of our dairy heritage as well. So as we work our way back to the beginning by First Congregational Church, I guess I would just draw your attention to the skyline of churches in the downtown, the steeples here, part of the Holy Hill area of Elgin's oldest churches. And right across the street is St. Joseph Church. It's founded by German Catholics. Our earliest church, Catholic church, is St. Mary's. We didn't go by that today, founded in the early 1850s, in a cobblestone building, by the way, by Irish Catholics. But German Catholics would arrive here later and actually start their church in that Knights of Columbus Hall would be another group that would form, and they would begin their own church here, St. Joseph Church, that also has a school attached to it over there too. So, but it's really the skyline of churches, I think, that sort of makes this area of Elgin's religious heritage that goes back to our founder, James Gifford, who would give a free lot to people who want to locate here. So we're going to wrap up our tour here. We've gone through parts of the oldest neighborhood that Elgin's founder, James Gifford, laid out. Have we seen everything? Heck, goodness, no. There's all kinds of other things we could see, and you might be wondering, if you know the area, why we pass by some certain things. Well, we could have stopped and seen and do another tour and just visit all different things along the area. There's so much to see around here. It's a very, very interesting area. It's been preserved, as I said earlier, as a National Register property. We've had a preservation ordinance since 1991, so only you can paint and you can do some other things, but you can't modify our exteriors. So the area is maintained a little bit now the way it used to be, and people that want to do some certain things will have to follow preservation guidelines. People want to learn more about Elgin history. Well, there's people like me. How did I get all this? You can go down to the Gelborden Public Library, which is a great resource, and look through the actual nomination when this area was put on the National Register. There's all kinds of other publications and sources. There's this library site that talks about how to research a home, that you can go find out things about homes and buildings yourself. And there's an endless number of newspaper articles that talk about all different homes that have been indexed, and some others that aren't. I just retired from teaching, which I loved all my life, and now I'm going to be at the Gelborden Library. There's a lot of newspaper articles. I want to look and connect the dots and learn even more about what I took you through today, and there's so much to learn. Elgin, outside of the city of Chicago, I don't know if there's a city that quite has the interesting history we do. And I don't know, it'd be hard to find a city that's been documenting its history the way we are and all we're doing. So hope some people that came along today via the camera got to see and learn and see the context of this neighborhood in a different way. And I'm glad you're along.